book discussion, biography of Lenin by Victor Sebestyen. I'm going to give a sort of several episodes of this before I finish the book. I'm about two-thirds into the book. Today I'm going to talk about cult of personality, quest for power, and how an individual's personality can form a whole organization, actually a whole government, a whole area, which in the case of the Soviet Union is definitely the case. So this is what I'm going to talk about today. I'm going to talk about several other aspects of this book. This is a very large book. It's an excellent book. It inspires a lot of ideas about political questions, about governance questions, questions of disruption, questions of lack of anticipating changes in the name of, let's say, namely the Tsars and how they couldn't see it. Also, the Western powers, how they couldn't see what's coming. So a lot of things that we can use, of course, in politics, but also in business. But today I want to focus on the cult of personality around Vladimir Ilyich Ulyanov, namely Lenin, and his quest for power. And I'm going to start with just about the October Revolution. So I'm going to talk about this. This is not even a podcast. It's September 28, 2021. This is Krimdelko. The market are just about to open. I'm in Europe, so it's afternoon here. It's opening time in the US. The Nasdaq future showing down about 1.5%. But as of last update, we are still up 14.95%. Market's up 19%. We're underperforming by 4.05%. Vladimir Ilyich Ulyanov, namely Lenin, he is the founder of the Bolshevik Party, the founder of social democracy and communism, and the founder of the Soviet Union. His journey towards becoming the most powerful man in Russia has a lot of facets and is incredibly well described by Victor Sebestyen. What I want to focus on today is in particular the time when he takes power and what happens then. Lenin takes power on October 25th, 1917. The Bolsheviks stage a coup. They topple the very weak interim government of Russia, because there was an interim government since February 1917 until October 1917, because the Tsars abducted, the Romanov dynasty was gone, and the interim government was not powerful enough. The Bolsheviks take power. And what's very striking is how Lenin, within days, completely reverses course after taking power. Within days, completely reverses course about some of the fundamental aspects of the social revolution. For example, freedom, the freedom of speech, the freedom of press, the so-called bourgeois vanity of having power and not sharing it. All of these things are thrown overboard, and Lenin does exactly what the Tsars did before him, and what, unfortunately, the Soviet Union and even Russia today is still doing, which is he completely obliterates any opposition. He threatens, he is aggressive, he kills the freedom of speech. I think on day 2, there's a decree already which basically allows for any kind of newspaper to be closed that is not in line with the Bolshevik Party. He opens up the gates for fire squads, basically making it possible for the Bolshevik thugs and commissars and soldiers and fanatics to go and terrorize the Russian population, which unfortunately, as we know today, was the case after Lenin, and also then, of course, his successor Stalin, and so on and so forth. So what's really striking here is that you're reading a book over about 800 pages about a man who starts out as a revolutionary because his brother gets hanged by the Tsarist system, who has a lot of ideas that we all can feel close to. You know, he is absolutely against the autocratic Tsarist regime. He is against feudalism. He's against not sharing wealth and land and opportunities. He is for socialism in a sense that even today social democrats still stand for, which is try to share some of the assets, opportunities, and wealth of the nation with everybody. He is incredibly open for example, free speech and things like that. He lives for years in exile in Switzerland, for example, or in Paris and London, which are relatively open societies compared to his native Russia. And within 2 days, and then the subsequent weeks, he just turns into a dictator with absolutely no tolerance of any of that stuff. So what do we learn from that? And according to Sebestyen, it is clear that the personality of Lenin has been to ask for or go for one thing in particular, which is power. Power, the preservation of power, the pursuit and preservation of power has been his sole goal. It's not clear when that happened during the biography. I can't pinpoint a certain day or anything. And there's a quote by Fyodor Dostoevsky, which is something along the lines that once you taste power and the ability to humiliate another human being, you are automatically, you lose your senses and you become a beast. And it's like a flame that just burns up in you, and then it ends up in disaster. Something along those lines. I'm paraphrasing here, not exactly. And I think this is what happened to Lenin. I guess he had certain ideas. He was an intellectual, first and foremost, because he was forced in exile to live in books and read and give speeches. That was his business. He wasn't doing anything else. He was financed by rich social democrats around Europe and all that stuff. So he wasn't working. He wasn't doing anything. He wasn't a lawyer or anything like that for many, many years. He was just a real revolutionary, a professional revolutionary. For example, in Switzerland, he lived at Spitalgasse 14. Today, it's kind of a little bit of a monument here in downtown Zurich. And he just would go around the restaurants of Zurich and give speeches about the revolution. That was his job. That was what he was really doing as a revolutionary. So all of a sudden he gets to power, and what does he do? He completely loses his senses. He tramps over his friends. For example, Maxim Gorky, one of the big supporters, intellectual and monetary supporters of the Bolsheviks. He is tolerated for a couple of months because he was such a big supporter. But even he's just noticing in some of the speeches that Sebestyen shares with us in the book how he's shocked at how Lenin is just turning into this monster. And I think this is just it's a subject that occupies me a lot, which is power, the pursuit of power, and then what do you do with power. Somebody once said power reveals. So once you are given power, your true personality really shows. So the true personality of Lenin absolutely shows. He's a man obsessed with power. Why that is the case, I don't know. It's not clear in the biography. Of course, there was some revenge against the Tsars because his brother was killed, but by the Tsars, because his brother tried to assassinate the Tsars. There was some, I would say, some moral sense of inequity that he felt that he was trying to fix within Russia, but then his actions completely obliterate all that. That has nothing to do anymore with any of that stuff. He is just a power-hungry pursuit in power. And I guess you might say that this is our tautology. Only people like him can actually get to power. But I don't believe that because, like I said in actually the previous episode today, the Bolsheviks were not supposed to get to power. They were weak. They were not well organized. They had no plans. They had nothing really other than the frustration of people, the frustration of the army, the frustration of the peasants on their side. They took power, and then they completely obliterated all these people and turned this maybe genuine mob that wanted change into a terror squad. And that's why the Soviet Union was a disaster for the next 70 years, because it just couldn't function. There was no plan. There was no real base of anything other than terror. Unfortunately, in hindsight, we know much better, and we can, let's say, my favorite British writer, Somerset Maugham, actually was a spy during those times in Russia for the British MI5, which I didn't know. So here's a person that I personally cherish a lot as a novelist writer, and he wasn't able to foresee the magnitude of what is coming. And I think the reason nobody was able to foresee that within the, let's say, Western powers is that Lenin just really turned into this monster once he was given power. And this opens up questions, of course, even today. What happens to people when they are given power? What happens to, let's say, people like Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos when they are given power? And the answers are not clear. I don't have answers. I have hopes. I think power reveals. It doesn't corrupt. That's a very, very important distinction. Power does not corrupt. If you're corrupt, it will reveal corruption if you're in power. But if you might as well be somebody else that is not corrupt and have power. So then the question comes up, can you even get to power without being corrupt? The answer is, of course, yes, particularly in a Popperian capitalist try and error correcting type system. Of course, you can get to power without being corrupt. In fact, I would say, as long as we have free markets, that it is the exact opposite. The pursuit of freedom allows for wealth generation, and wealth generation allows for pursuit for freedom. So if you are in this flywheel, the more open and free you are towards new ideas and error correction, the more wealth you can generate, and the more wealth you have, the more free you are. So I said that many times before. One wheel turns the other, and you can't have one without the other. And this is, of course, has been shown in the Soviet Union very dramatically. The power that was grasped by the Bolsheviks was never shared with. There was no wealth generation. Even today, there's no wealth generation in Russia. Yes, Russia was a superpower, but it was only a military superpower and nothing else. And after the wall broke in the '89, there was nothing left in Russia. Russia is even today a bankrupt country intellectually, money-wise, everything-wise. There is just nothing left there. They're trying, of course, to be relevant with threats. This is one of the old tricks of Russia. It was nuclear power, today it's cybersecurity and all that. So you are still relevant, of course, as a country, but there's no wealth there. And we can see that also by all the emigres and the people that try to move out of the country because there's no opportunity there. So let's get back to the discussion here, though. The point here, the summary of this episode is just that I am right now in the book of Lenin's biography, right after he takes power. And what's really striking is how fast he just throws overboard all the ideas of freedom and socialism and all these things, and turns into a dictator and a very, very scary monster. And I just want to say one more thing here. This podcast has absolutely no business in being political. So I don't want to be political here, but I want to say one thing as far as the current situation is concerned. And the current situation globally is that we are still in the shackles of this pandemic. And unfortunately, what I'm seeing is, for example, here in Switzerland and in many other places around the world, it is a tightening of individual freedoms in the name of the pandemic. So in the name of fighting the pandemic, for example, here in Switzerland, if you go to a public place like a restaurant or a library, you have to show that you're vaccinated. And I personally, I am my view of government is that the measure of government is how conflicts are solved without coercion and violence. This is a conflict, and solving it with coercion is not the right way. So, of course, I'm very disappointed about even the Swiss government. I have to say that the people on the street are incredibly supportive of a freedom type solution here. So in other words, I'm not being harassed here too much about things like vaccination and stuff. I am vaccinated. I do actually have a certificate. So I'm not questioning that. I don't mind vaccinating. I just mind the fact that people are given power. Let's say restaurants are given power to refuse somebody if they don't have a vaccination certificate. And even worse is there are now lines in front of restaurants where you're being checked for that. And of course, that is just the visual of that is terrible. And just reading Lenin's biography, having just visited today his old apartment at Spitalgasse 14, and then walking over to the Central Library of Zurich, where I used to study as a college student, where the Zurich as a spirit of freedom always has been and still is in my heart, and then to be basically refused to walk in this particular case because they wouldn't recognize my US vaccination certificate. That was a bit of a slap in the face. Now, having said that, again, I am very positive about particularly Switzerland. I think Switzerland has such a deep culture of freedom and federalism and is such a law-abiding country that as long as the law is not being played around, meaning as long as the law is not being twisted to do terrible things, I have faith in this country to stay on course and keep its liberties and all these things. But I am not so sure about all the other countries in particular. of course, my own country where I am residing now, which is the United States. So again, this was a little bit of a political excursus here. Reading Lenin's biography, I cannot not talk a bit political. And I just want to remind people that it is our prerogative as adults today to leave a place for our children that has, most importantly, that gives them the opportunity to pursue the path to freedom, wealth generation, and a dignity of life that includes those things like freedom and wealth generation. Because without that, unfortunately, history has shown that things don't go as well. I'm positive about it. I think we have enough checks and balances in the system. Also, like I said in the previous episode, that the rise of crypto is a good counterbalance for any autocratic movements, and therefore I'm still optimistic that we have enough innate mechanisms, particularly in Silicon Valley, to offset any moves towards autocratic solutions. Thank you.